Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, where we're going to dive into three of the latest Steelers-related topics, and there's plenty to talk about, perhaps more than ever to talk about, unprecedented things to talk about. We have to, first of all, talk about the wild card loss to the Texans, which feels like it was months, if not a year ago at this point, in terms of the news cycle. We'll touch on that pretty quickly. We know most of you want to hear about Mike Tomlin and the head coaching search, so we will get to those topics as well, but we have to pay some mind to the latest wild card loss. I'm Ross. Above me on the screen, as always, is my co-host, Joe Clark. Joe, it's been a whirlwind couple of days here, and you're preparing to go down to, what is it, Frisco, Texas still?
Yep.
For the Shrine Bowl. I think they just announced the roster today. I'm headed down to the Senior Bowl shortly thereafter with a small crew to cover those events for the website. Just off the top, before we dive in, the Shrine Bowl, who's the biggest player? We'll preview this probably more in depth. Will you be gone next week, by the way?
I will be, yeah, because I leave on Wednesday and works there starts on Thursday.
Okay, I'll have to figure something out for that. But in that case, especially then, give me just your one or maybe two players from the Shrine Bowl that, have caught your eye on that roster.
Yeah, a few guys I've had my names on that were announced. Cade Klubnik was obviously supposed to be one of the top quarterbacks in this draft class, and that did not really surface much this season. He struggled as Clemson struggled, and I think now he's probably looked at more as a day three type of pick, and so I'm curious to see how he goes and how he looks. There's two names that they wouldn't announce on the roster because they can't announce yet, which is interesting because they have announced some guys from Indiana. They have announced some guys from Miami, so curious to see who that could end up being. But the other name that stands out to me just from a, I guess, prestige perspective is Harold Perkins Jr., the linebacker from LSU. I think before last year, really, he was getting a lot of early first round buzz, and that kind of went away. I think he got hurt last year, maybe. He just didn't have a great season. And now I think he's trying to work his way into the day two mix. But yeah, other than that, I mean, there's a couple receivers. Skylar Bell from UConn's probably a later round guy, but I watched a couple of UConn games this year just because they were on. And he's an intriguing option. Kendrick Law from Kentucky, the receiver, is another receiver that I kind of have my eyes on. I think I'm going to be watching the receivers pretty closely this year because the Steelers definitely need to overhaul at that position. So quarterback and receiver, I think, is going to be a pretty big focus, even though the quarterback class, there's really nobody that, you would expect them to take super early, but just guys to keep an eye on.
Maybe one of those surprises will be Trinidad Chambliss from Ole Miss. We'll see what's happening there with his lawsuit, trying to get eligibility waiver. It was declined, and certainly with Dante Moore returning to college, he could be a top name in this class. Whether that is deserved or not, I think he's certainly intriguing enough. But maybe that's one of the guys that will be a surprise down there in Frisco. We're going to move on to the Steelers-related stuff. There'll be plenty of time to talk about draft stuff moving forward. I just wanted to get that preview since Joe won't be here for next week's show. But talking about the Texans game, the Steelers losing to the Texans, it was another blowout, though it didn't feel like a blowout for most of the game. Of course, much of that happened in the fourth quarter with two defensive touchdowns for the Texans. That defense proving to be every bit as great as it was hyped up to be. I think people looked at some of their more recent results against some other opponents that weren't that great, and maybe the defense didn't perform up to task, but good defenses perform well in the playoffs, and that defense proved itself to be more than good. They have a chance to do some historic things, I think, in the rest of the postseason, but I think that's a good place to start. The offensive line, I think Mike Tomlin had kind of hyped it up as you guys are more or less going to control whether or not we win this thing. And there were reports that Arthur Smith was really riding the offensive line going into this week. Unfortunately, they did not win that matchup. And I just wanted to highlight that doesn't mean that the offensive line is bad or has taken a step back in their development or anything like that. It just the Texas defensive line is that good. And there were some good things still to take away from the offensive line play. It wasn't all bad, but certainly they lost the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably Troy Fautano's worst game of the season. Dylan Cook lost the one rep that led to the strip sack that I should think Sheldon Rankins took back. But I mean, I thought all in all, Dylan Cook was actually decent for most of the day. Um, but yeah, Fautano struggled repeatedly. Isaac Samalo had the one rep, he got ran over. It was just a bad game for them against a motivated Texans team that's been really, really good all season long. And so I'm not too concerned about it. I mean, it was basically Fautano's rookie season. If you think of that, he only played a couple of snaps last year, and it was, some people argued, including Duke Manyweather, an offensive line guru, that he was worthy of all pro consideration. Thought Dylan Cook gave you the end of the year was great. And so yeah, I think they're going to need to figure out what's going to happen long term with left guard, whether that's Spencer Anderson, a rookie, or another free agent, because I would not anticipate Isaac Seumalo coming back, but I mean, I think you have the bones of a pretty strong offensive line, whether it's Cook or they give Broderick Jones another chance at left tackle, and then Frazier, McCormick, and Fautanu filling out the rest. So I think the offensive line is actually in a pretty good spot for the future. But yeah, they were definitely a big letdown in that game. And again, like, what do you expect? I mean, they're going up against who Mike Tomlin at the time called the two most dynamic, or the most dynamic edge duo in football. Um, just all around, it's just a solid unit, and Steelers just weren't as ready to go up against that level of talent across the board.
Yeah, and even beyond the top tandem, they have so much depth at that position. Denico Autry and Derek Barnett, and they've got guys. It's kind of like the Steelers pass rush that we all thought they would have this year. Unfortunately, it didn't really turn out that way. Three of those guys on the Steelers ended up getting injured, and of course, Jack Sawyer's a rookie. I did want to talk about in that game. One kind of encouraging thing to me was the fact that when the Steelers needed it, Jack Sawyer and Y.A. Black made a big play, and that can't be you can't just look past that. That's two rookies making a big play in their very first playoff game, and I think Jack Sawyer, they call him 5-star, and they call him I think they joke like good things always happen to 5-star. He made that good thing happen in that case, and he showed the same kind of playmaking traits in college in that Ohio State run, making some pretty big plays for them in the college football playoffs. And so we're seeing that already here. That's a good sign for the future. Y.A. Black, who maybe up and down season, didn't have anywhere near the season that the preseason hype maybe would have suggested, but still okay at times, sometimes actually pretty good. But yeah, he made a big play there, catching that deflected, I guess it was technically ruled a fumble, that he caught. So just a fumble recovery there on the stat sheet for Y.A. Black. But yeah, big play for them, and I thought that was a big positive. But on the other side of that, 3 points off of 3 turnovers. Now, one of those turnovers was deep, basically at the goal line, preventing what would have been a score for the Texans. So that one, you probably don't expect to score off of something like that. So, if you want to call it 3 points off of 2.5 turnovers, though on the stat sheet it shows 3. So that was one of the big stories of the game, was just the inability to capitalize. Meanwhile, of course, the Texans scored 2 touchdowns on 2 turnovers. So that's, if you want to circle one thing that decided the game, that is certainly one of them.
Yeah, the inability to capitalize, I think, off the I mean, the Eccles one was big because it took points off the board, but I think the ones earlier in the game, the inability to really capitalize and put 6 on the board, you just never, and I think Aaron Rodgers said it after the game, that he just never felt they had the momentum, and he was settling for 3, instead of, scoring a touchdown off a big turnover. Then I think it's hard to, really feel good about that. And the fact that they couldn't find the end zone all game is obviously another issue, but you aren't helping yourself out when you have to settle there in that spot. You're not, your defense comes and makes a big play, and the best you can do is barely manage to get a field goal out of it. So obviously I think that's a big factor as into what happened. Because I mean, this was a game until the fourth quarter. I think if the Steelers had ever really established the momentum, then maybe, things go differently in the fourth. But They had no opportunity to do that, and I think it starts with the DK Metcalf drop sapped a lot of it. I think that if he catches that pass, then um you finally get going, but him dropping that zapped a lot of their chances to build momentum, and it was just never there for them.
Yeah, all the horizontal stuff that they've kind of feasted on, the quick passing stuff, the underneath stuff to Gainwell and Warren and Jonnu Smith. God, Jonnu Smith. How many catches for negative yards? It was the kind of a great way to sum up the Jonnu Smith experience. Hopefully, the last time we have to endure such said experience. Certainly if Arthur Smith's gone, I would think Jonnu Smith, his favorite tight end, will also be joining him. But we'll talk about some of that later. We've probably already spent more time on this game than I meant to. But yeah, another disappointing loss, another kind of blowout. And like you said, it was there for the taking up until the fourth quarter. And what a different world we might be living in now had they won, because, well, for at least one more week, Mike Tomlin wouldn't have stepped down. The big news of the week being Mike Tomlin, head coach of the Steelers for 19 seasons, finally called it a career, tied for the franchise lead in regular season wins with Chuck Noll. It's kind of hard to sum up his career because the recency bias of it all is just kind of so much stagnation and negativity surrounding him. But you have to give him credit for all the good times he gave the team as well. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 Super Bowl win. So many years where it felt like they were capable of winning the Super Bowl, and maybe one thing didn't break their way. There was the Le'Veon Bell injury year and the Antonio Brown getting knocked out and in the playoffs, and there was all a bunch of what ifs, but there was so much excitement in it all with Tomlin. So personally, it was a bittersweet moment for me. I know some fans were kind of taking the ding dong, the witch is dead route, which however. I personally don't love that line of thinking, but I understand it. But yeah, it was kind of a sad day for me, and it seemed like a sad day inside the locker room. Joe, what was your first reaction?
Yeah, I was surprised at first. I mean, I guess we were kind of tipped off a little bit ahead of time with the reporter, like the big news coming on the Pat McAfee show. And there was the implication that it had to do with the Steelers. So, I mean, when the news dropped, you were ready for it, but it's still shocking to actually, read that and see it come across the screen. I mean, I've been on record saying that I never really thought that he was the type that would step down. I think they thought, he really loved coaching and would just, keep trying to, grind, and despite whatever happened in the playoffs, just keep chasing that next one. But it was interesting. I mean, that Rodney Barber had kind of said that Tomlin told him ahead of the year that he thought it was his last year. So it's something that, he had made up his mind on, that he had going into this year, that he knew. Um, which I think is also kind of important because it defeats all the narrative that, oh, he didn't like the fire Tomlin chance and that kind of drove him away, or, oh, the playoff loss drove him away. I mean, if he was saying before the year that it was his last year, I think even if, you go to the AFC Championship game, maybe if he had his mind set up on this being his last year, then he's gone. But yeah, I was definitely surprised. I again, bittersweet. I think it's good, and I'm reinvigorated to see what this organization is going to do. It's not going to be stagnant. I mean, last year, Mike Tomlin said there was going to be changes, and there was 2 changes, and they were both, fairly minor, and adding Gerald Alexander and adding Scott McCurley. There weren't any, sweeping changes, and now you're going to see sweeping changes. So I'm intrigued to see, because I think, at some point things were getting stale and that the organization needed a new direction. But I mean, Mike Tomlin was hired when I was 6 years old, so for the most part, all I've ever known with the Steelers football is Mike Tomlin football. So definitely a weird day, but looking ahead, there's a lot to be excited about, and I think there's the guys they have on their list there's a lot of good candidates there. Um, so I'm intrigued to see what ends up happening.
Yeah, will he go to TV? Will he return to coaching? I think both of those things are up in the air. I think a lot of the national guys are saying that TV is a possibility, probably just kind of shilling for their networks, to be honest, because everyone close to Tomlin seems to think TV isn't a thing in his future. I guess we'll see. It is kind of a cushy job that you can make a whole lot of money doing one day a week kind of thing. So maybe he will, but seems like he wanted to take a step away and spend more time with his family. And certainly having a schedule where you got to be in a studio in a certain place once a week isn't conducive to that. And so I'd be kind of surprised if he went into TV. Art Rooney II, in his press conference on Wednesday after the news broke on Tuesday, I think it was, right? It's all been kind of a blur, but
yeah.
He said that Tomlin's decision was probably more about family than it is about football, and so that tells me, that kind of informs me what Tomlin plans on doing, which is not coaching this year, probably not doing TV this year either. Now, will he return to coaching? That is a big question and has implications for the Steelers. There's a little bit of uncertainty around this, but because Mike Tomlin stepped down, the Steelers still hold his rights, and he would be a trade candidate. Now, how long would the Steelers be able to trade him? Well, his contract runs through the 2026 season. It would expire after the 2026 season unless they picked up the option. They're not going to pick up that option and pay him, however many $1 million to do nothing just to extend that trade window. I wouldn't think that would be a pretty interesting move, especially if he plans on taking more than 2 years, more than one season off. That would be a lot of money for absolutely nothing. But I think it was Mike Florio originally reported, no, they can trade him, 3, 4, 5, whenever he comes back to coaching years down the road, and they'd still have rights to him. It turns out that is maybe not the case. Somebody reached out to Florio and clarified, with knowledge of NFL employment and contracts and stuff like that, and basically said that, more than likely they'd have to trade him this year or they're going to lose the rights to him. So probably we don't see a trade scenario is my best guess. However, it does depend on the language used in the contracts because, anything could be negotiated. So maybe the Steelers had some kind of clause in there that protects them against it expiring in a situation like this. Certainly, with all the speculation around Tomlin the last time they had a contract negotiation, you would think that maybe they would think of such a thing. So it's possible. We don't know for sure. The issue is coach contracts aren't made public. So it's kind of just stabs in the dark and guessing at this point. But the other thing to consider is, when did Mike Tomlin sign that contract? When I guess what I'm trying to say is, what is defined as the end of his term? Is it immediately after the 2026 season? Is it in March with the start of the new league year? Like player contracts do, or is it when he signed it, which I think he signed his last contract, what was it, like June or something like that?
I think it was June, yeah.
And so all of that matters pretty significantly, because if he only takes 1 year off from coaching, comes back the following year, and say his contract, they still have his rights until June, well, no team's going to wait to get a coach until June, after OTAs and like mini camp and stuff start. So that would matter. And even if he's under contract until the start of the new league year, until March, that's pretty late for teams to kind of hop in the secure their head coach, because gosh, you got to be attracting free agents at that time. And so maybe there is a world in which he takes a year off and the Steelers still have a bargaining chip to trade for him, or to trade him to another team. There are examples of this in the past with Sean Payton was one, Bruce Arians was one. Sean Payton fetched a first rounder and then a future third and fourth pick swap. So, fairly significant value on the table potentially for Tomlin. So an interesting nugget there. And that's why what he does next does matter.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that given Tomlin's resume, that if he were to be traded, you would look at that Peyton trade and kind of want to get that same sort of value for him. I think, he'd definitely be worth that. But I mean, shoot, at this point, he's not coaching. I think you'd be happy with any sort of compensation for him. Third round pick, fourth round pick. I mean, you take it. You take whatever compensation you can get. But if you can make that into a first, I think it was for Peyton, it was a first and a future second for Peyton and a future third. So that would be a fantastic haul for a guy that's not coaching for you anymore. Sucks the Saints haven't done anything with it. They have not taken their extra draft capital and turned themselves around. But you'd hope that things would be different in Pittsburgh.
Well, that makes the case for if somebody does want to trade for Tomlin, you go, look, the Broncos gave up all this capital, but look at the Broncos just 2 years later competing deep
Yeah.
into the AFC playoffs. They were the number 1 seed. They had a bye. And so that's, that's something that you point out if you're the Steelers trying to negotiate that thing for sure. I think it's worth pointing out the team reaction to Tomlin's departure. Tomlin told them in a meeting on Tuesday. The meeting started as it would any other meeting, just kind of a debrief about the playoff game because they didn't really meet as a team other than just a quick, post-game, whatever. So Tomlin started that meeting, and then quickly it took a turn when he announced that he would be stepping down. Mike DeFabo of The Athletic released a great article this morning where he pointed out a few different things. Some were named players' quotes, some were anonymous player quotes, and the general attitude was that there was a great sense of kind of sorrow in the locker room. There was a lot of people very upset and sad about Tomlin moving on. I think Christian Kuntz said it was like a funeral. Jonnu Smith said that there was a standing ovation. Calvin Austin III said he didn't think anybody expected it. And so you get the picture. This was like a blindside and just a lot of sadness in that locker room, which tells you everything you need to know about Mike Tomlin. He never lost the locker room, and that's why Art Rooney II stood by him all these years, despite fans wanting a change. And Rooney even said he was ready to run it back. So that was going to happen if Tomlin didn't step down. Joe, what were some of the things in that DeFabo article? Because there was some good nuggets in there.
Yeah, I think the one that was kind of the most intriguing to me. The one that there was one that was interesting. That was one anonymous player said that the Steelers, they were never mad at Tomlin. They always wanted to play for him. They had an issue with the coordinators, which that was a little bit interesting. But I think the one that stuck out was at the very end when they said Aaron Rodgers was sobbing and just kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over to Tomlin. I thought that was, pretty interesting. Rodgers kind of putting the brunt on him for not getting not winning the playoff game, not breaking Tomlin's now 7-game playoff losing streak. Was a 6-game playoff losing streak heading in the 8-year playoff win drought. Rodgers doesn't come across as somebody that, not in a bad way either, but is putting, a ton of pressure on himself and to succeed. But I mean, all the great ones are wired that same way. And I think that kind of nugget shows you that even what he says in the media, and I mean, obviously he wants to win, but he's internally, he's putting a lot more pressure on himself than I think, was, maybe he put out there at least. So that one to me was interesting. And even then, like that he played for Tomlin for 1 year and he felt so strongly about that. It wasn't as if this was a guy that had been his quarterback for years and years and years. I mean, he had talked about how strong the relationship was multiple times throughout the year, which, just what's really asinine to ask him in his last press conference what he thinks about the guy, when he's talked about it literally all year. But anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, he just talked about how strong the relationship was, and I think that really kind of shows it. And I mean, even TJ Watt, and he said 2 years ago I didn't want to play for anybody else other than Mike Tomlin. And I think that a Fable article about him, being in tears and just saying no, no, no over and over kind of shows it. I mean, if you have TJ Watt and Aaron Rodgers in tears, I think the what the explanation, not the explanation, the description of it as a funeral by Christian Kuntz is a good one.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's the chances of finding somebody like Tomlin again in terms of a culture guy are slim to none. I mean, there might not be a better culture guy in the history of the league than Tomlin when it comes to keeping a locker room together. And despite the ups and downs of this season, I think we'll remember the 2025 team as one that was very together. I think you could have easily seen fractures and infighting and stuff like that. And right to the bitter end, they were supportive of Tomlin. They talked about how close the locker room was. Even somebody who like Adam Thielen, who stepped in late, I think he said immediately, like, I've had 5 significant conversations since being here for the last 3 days, and none of them have had to do about football. I think there was a report on one of the broadcasts on NBC on Sunday Night Football, I think against the Ravens, that they were spending 4 nights a week together as a team with Aaron Rodgers, going over film, hanging out. That was the story of this team, and that's set as a culture at the top by Tomlin. And so, I think, kind of a sad day in Pittsburgh, at least for me. I know some people don't agree, but it's a time to reflect on the positives of Mike Tomlin's career, and you can be excited for the future as well. Change was needed. I think I'll admit that, but yeah, I don't really have anything else to say there. We'll move into the coaching search portion of that. On that note, Art Rooney II said at his press conference that he would be leading the search along with Omar Khan, the general manager. It's notable that Daniel Martin Rooney was there at the press conference, sitting in the corner with Omar Khan. Art Rooney II didn't mention his son when talking about who would lead the search, but I think it's fair to assume that he's going to be some part of that in some way. If you go back to Mike Tomlin being hired, Dan Rooney and led it with his son, Art Rooney II. And so it's kind of probably going to be a similar setup here. I think Omar Khan is kind of responsible for giving him candidates. Art Rooney will then conduct the interviews, probably alongside his son and maybe Khan as well in the room. A lot to think about as they try to replace the big shoes of Mike Tomlin. 7 candidates so far, and by the time you guys listen to this, maybe there'll be 8 or 9 because things have been moving fast. The first day, like right after basically Art Rooney finished his press conference, 5 candidates in rapid succession, and the next day, which is now Thursday, today, 2 more already. Probably there will be more by the end of the day, and there's a clear trend, Joe.
Defense, lots and lots of defense. The first interview request that came in was Nate Scheelhaus, and since then, I think every single request has been a defense coordinator. So, yeah, everything includes today with Giro Eviro, and I might have gotten that name wrong. I'm sorry if I did. And Jeff Halfley were the 2 today, on top of Chris Shula, Brian Flores, Jesse Minter, and shoot. There's one more, right? Who am I forgetting?
Did you do Weaver?
Yes, Anthony Weaver. Anthony Weaver. There we go. So yeah, they are going for another, fairly young defensive-minded coach, which is what they did with Chuck Noll and Bill Cowher and Mike Tomlin. And well, I get the argument for going for somebody on the offensive side of the ball. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think this year, the coaches on the defensive side of the ball, I just think they're better candidates to lead a team than there are on the offensive side of the ball this year. Um, and I mean, honestly, if you look at it, I know going offense has been the wave, but a lot of these hotshot young offensive coaches that then get their chance to run a team haven't fared very well. Um, it is a 50-50 split right now if you look at the teams that are left in terms of if they're run by an offensive-minded coach or a defensive-minded coach. But, I mean, you look at Mike Vrabel, what he's done with the Patriots. You look at what D'Amico Ryan just did against the Steelers and the Texans. So I'm certainly not against hiring a defensive-minded guy, even with the way the Steelers' offense has been porous these last few years.
Yeah, and Rooney talked about the search in his Wednesday press conference, said they weren't going to be narrow, but they have very much stuck to their traditional type at head coach. Like you pointed out, only one offensive guy so far, and a lot of them young. Many of them, almost all of them, have no head coach experience. I think is Brian Flores the only one with head coach experience right now, and he didn't have that long of a tenure. He's still fairly young. Relative to the league, and his tenure with the Dolphins was pretty good, and he probably got fired for reasons that weren't maybe totally above board there, so with the lawsuit and everything. So yeah, I think let's each highlight one of the, I don't want to get into all 7 or however many, I'm losing track, I think 7. Yeah, I don't want to get into all of them because we'll be here all day, but let's each highlight one. Joe, I'll let you start.
Yeah, so I'll go with Jesse Minter, who was the Chargers defensive coordinator. He shut down the Steelers earlier this year, held them to just 10 points, and I think the 10 came on, there was one very late touchdown, garbage time touchdown. He's intriguing because he has AFC North experience. He was a defense assistant for the Ravens for a few years and then worked his way up to their assistant DBs coach and then their DBs coach. He's also intriguing to me because he's a football lifer. He's been around the game his entire life. His dad, Rick, was a coach. He started off doing college. He was a defense, worked his way up to DC at Notre Dame before becoming the head coach at Cincinnati. And where he's at Cincinnati, his defensive backs coach for 2 years was Mike Tomlin. And last year, before the Steelers played the Chargers, Jesse Minter kind of talked about how Mike Tomlin was somebody that took him under his wing and, was kind of a mentor towards him. And he was really young. He was in high school at that point. He went on to become a wide receiver at Mount St. Joseph, which is a D3 school outside of Cincinnati. And from there, got to start at Notre Dame, then went to Cincinnati, and then kind of went the FCS route at Indiana State. But after he left the Ravens, he became the defense coordinator at Vanderbilt, and then Jim Harbaugh hired him as his DC at Michigan, led the national championship defense in 2023. He's gone to the Chargers and has led one of the best defenses in football for the last 2 years. By all accounts, he's a great leader. He could bring his dad with him to the Steelers. I think his dad's still coaching. He's a defensive analyst for the Chargers, and he was at Michigan at the same time as Minter. So you would have, an older defensive minded coach. His dad in the NFL also worked at the Eagles for a linebackers coach in the 2000s. That was under Andy Reid, I think, too, or that might have been Chip Kelly, whatever. Regardless, he's a longtime coach. He's a good defensive mind, and I think Jesse, even though he's 42, so he's a little bit older than some of the other guys they're interviewing, but I think, I think he is more than deserving to be a head coach, and he has literally gotten interview requests from every team this cycle. So,
yeah, he's certainly a top candidate. I wanted to talk about Chris Shula and a lot of the same talking points you just had in terms of connections back to the Steelers, in terms of having NFL bloodline. Chris Shula is the grandson of Don Shula, who has the most wins in NFL history as a head coach. And Don Shula actually employed Chuck Noll, gave him his first coordinator job before he came to the Steelers. That was with the Baltimore Colts at the time. And he actually recommended Noll to the Steelers, recommended him to Dan Rooney, the late Dan Rooney. To Art Rooney Sr. at the time, it would have been. And so there's a lot of Steelers connections there. It doesn't end there because his dad, Dave Shula, he was like a receivers and quarterback coach in Miami under his dad, Don Shula. And at the time, Kevin Colbert was a college scout on the Dolphins, so he worked with the Shula family pretty closely. There's one more. Oh, he worked with Tom Arth at John Carroll College. Tom Arth was the head coach, and Chris Shula was, I believe, the defensive coordinator under him. And so the current Steelers quarterbacks coach has experience with Shula, and so that's an interesting connection there. There's plenty of reason to be aware of the guy if you're the Steelers. He seems to be the odds-on favorite at the moment in terms of like sports books. They all have him at the top of the list in terms of odds. He's, again, a defensive coordinator. He's young. I think he's 39. I think he turns 40 soon. So he's a little older than Tomlin or even Noll, Cowher. All those guys were in their mid kind of 30s. So he's a little older than that, but he's still pretty young, comparatively speaking to many coaches in the league. He's a Sean McVay guy, which a lot of Sean McVay guys have gone on to have pretty great NFL coaching careers at this point. Not all of them. There's a few duds in there, but his coaching tree is pretty vast, which I think McVay connects back to the Mike Shanahan tree, and there's even some Gruden in there as well. So a very well-established coaching tree there for Shula. And the interesting thing here with Shula is that Albert Breer, SI.com, insider for the NFL, actually connected Shula to the Steelers before Tomlin even announced his resignation. And so this was a guy that was on the radar early on. I think there was two coaches that fell into that bucket. Diana Rossini talked about Marcus Freeman, or was it Marcus Freeman? Yeah. I'm getting all mixed up at this point. Notre Dame's head coach, who he's staying in college. Well, at least we think. He seems to be doubling down on staying in college, but there's some that think maybe the Steelers' job would be the only one to pry him away. That's beside the point. Shula was connected to the Steelers prior to the search even getting underway, which makes me think there's a pretty good chance that he could be the guy. He's also had interview requests with many of the teams with openings. Right now, there are 8 openings because John Harbaugh was hired in New York. There were 9. We're down to 8. So the dominoes are starting to fall. We'll see. Hopefully Shula makes it in the door before he agrees to go elsewhere. I think if he comes in, there's a chance he could bring in somebody like a Nate Chillhouse as like an offensive coordinator with him. So that would be like kind of a double dip, if you will, which would be, I think, exciting to some. The only criticism on Shula is his defenses in LA haven't been outstanding, though they've been average, slightly above average, but they've been aggressive in sacks and turnovers. The Steelers like that kind of stuff. He's said to be kind of I think Breer referred to him as a battleship commander, and McVay had some great things to say about him as a leader and getting the most out of his players and being a culture guy. Back to what I was talking about earlier, culture being a huge thing for the Rooneys. So he makes a ton of sense. He's probably my favorite candidate at the moment. Joe, is Minter your kind of top dog at the moment, or do you have a?
I think Shula is my favorite candidate right now too. I mean, Freeman's not in the mix. So it would be Shula and Freeman would be my top 2 if Freeman ever got in the mix. It doesn't seem like he is. But yeah, right now I have Shula 1, and then I mean, because I also think if you hire Shula, you could bring in Shieldhouse as your offense coordinator if he doesn't get a head coaching job elsewhere, which I think would be a pretty big win for the Steelers. But regardless, just of everything he brings to the table, I have him as my favorite candidate.
Yeah, I agree. All right. The big notable thing was Rooney said they're not considering internal candidates. So sorry, Arthur Smith. Sorry, Terrell Austin. Most likely those guys are gone, especially Austin. I guess there's a chance Smith could be back since he has one more year on his contract. And in the past, coaches have kept some of their coordinators. I don't know if I expect that to be the case here. I'd probably lean no. But it is possible there are definitely position coaches worth retaining. I think Jalen Warren made a pitch or a push on Twitter to retain running backs coach Eddie Faulkner, who was an interim offensive coordinator for the Steelers in 2023 when they fired Matt Canada midseason. There's some other guys. Maybe you keep a Tom Arth. Maybe you keep a Zach Azani. Carl Dunbar. There's some position coaches worth keeping, but we'll see. A lot of head coaches want to be able to install their guys, and so it's certainly all up in the air at the moment. Anything else from the Rooney side of things? I think he just said this could take weeks, so we'll, I don't expect this to probably happen until maybe early mid-Feb, but we'll see. Like I said, the first Harbaugh domino fell, and so things could start happening quickly for others, though the Steelers haven't even completed an interview yet, so certainly it'll be a while. Anything else, Joe, before we move on to our listener question?
I think that's everything.
All right. If you want to have a question answered on a future episode, 412-254-3145. If I spoke too fast, that's in the show notes and the description, depending on where you are watching this. We thank you guys for giving us calls throughout the season. It was another fun season to cover. There were the ups and downs. It was frustrating at times, but I think it was a fairly memorable season all in all. The Aaron Rodgers year probably won't be forgotten anytime soon. Certainly not the final Mike Tomlin year. So a lot of notable things, and we thank you guys for that. This one is a new caller, I believe, Stephen Bean from St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hey guys, love the show. My name is Stephen Bean. I am from St. Petersburg, Florida. Huge Steelers fan. And my question is that, so given that Will Howard was drafted in the 6th round, what do you think the chances are that he actually is the franchise guy moving forward? I am unfamiliar with pretty much any starting quarterback that wasn't taken in the 1st round. I just did a quick Google search, though. Technically, Jalen Hurts was 2nd round. Obviously, Brock Purdy and Tom Brady very late. But majority are just taken in the 1st round. So do you guys think there's any chance that guy is our franchise guy moving forward? Thank you.
Question about Will Howard and his viability as a starting quarterback moving forward from Steven. Thank you for the call. It's a timely topic because Aaron Rodgers is almost certainly gone at this point. If not retired, certainly gone from the Steelers. I think Art Rooney II said as much in his press conference that Rodgers came to play with Tomlin. With Tomlin gone, you can expect Rodgers to most likely be gone as well. So, who's going to be the quarterback? And Will Howard, I think, has as good a chance as anybody right now to be their starting quarterback in week 1. Joe, what do you think about him and his viability as a starter?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what they do this offseason, but even if they draft a rookie, and I anticipate them doing so, who knows who that's going to be? Who knows if they're going to be ready to start week 1? I think the only knock against Will Howard is you haven't seen him play football at all in the preseason or during the season because of the injury suffered in training camp. So it's tough to really say because you just haven't seen it out of him. But we'll see it next preseason, I guess, and that'll probably go a long way towards determining if he does start week 1. The odds are stacked against him to be the franchise guy, but you can't definitively say no until you actually see him play football.
Yeah, with the draft class as weak as it is, who are the Steelers going to take that's going to supplant him at least right away? I mean, there's Mason Rudolph's under contract, so maybe Mason ends up being the week 1 starter, but I don't know how much the Steelers want to keep retreading in those waters, but I guess it's an option. I think I would prefer them to get a look at Howard. And one thing I will say is he seemed to be a sponge to Aaron Rodgers, which can be nothing but a good thing. Rodgers talked about how much he poured into him. Howard talked about taking detailed notes and nuggets of what he learned from Aaron Rodgers along the way so that he could implement them in his career. I think, one example that comes to mind is he called it the guitar fake, which is, some of the play action stuff that Aaron Rodgers does, which is second to none in the NFL. Really, his play action fakes are elite. And so, little details like that could go a long way for helping a young guy. And so maybe Howard steps in and looks, impressive and looks like he has learned a lot, even though he hasn't really been able to play. Only time will tell. I think it's impossible to answer your question, but I think he has as good a chance as anybody right now to be the week 1 starter. Although I will admit a ton can change over the next, however many weeks with a new head coach and 12 projected draft picks. Maybe there's a very large free agency move. I mean, so many things can change. So it's up in the air entirely. Thank you for the question, Steven. That's all for our show. As I mentioned, Joe will be in Frisco for the Shrine Bowl next week. He won't be on the show. I'll have to figure out, maybe Alex will step in, or I think Josh will be gone too. So probably Alex Kazora will end up stepping in with me. We will have to figure that out, but I will be here. We will have a show next week. That is all. Thank you again for following along for the 2025 season. We hope you guys stick around. There's so much excitement in Pittsburgh world right now with the head coaching search and the renewed optimism that can provide. I'm Ross. That's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.